Well, for more, let's go to Sean Dubrovac, President and CEO of the tech consultancy firm Avrio Institute. He joins us now from Washington, DC. Welcome to the program, Sean. Now, this House Democratic investigation has found that Amazon, Facebook, Apple and Google each hold monopoly power in their respective industries. Do you agree that they're effectively squeezing out their smaller rivals? Can you just explain to us why that might be the case?
Certainly, they have very large control over certain segments of what's happening online, and that's where a lot of the opposition arises. But one could also argue that it's a very competitive marketplace, and the report that came out from Congress failed to, I think, fully adequately capture some of the competition that these companies face.
Well, that's right. I mean, playing devil's advocate, you could argue that why should these big tech companies be penalised for being pioneers and innovative in their respective businesses? But the other side of the coin is that smaller rivals really don't stand a chance against their spending power. I mean, they have billions upon billions of dollars in their coffers. So how do you make the playing field more level so that these smaller players can have a chance to compete in those businesses as well?
I think we have to first figure out who it is that's being harmed. And when we look at traditional antitrust regulation, it's looking at whether these companies are operating in the welfare of consumers and on behalf of consumers. So you could look at somebody like Amazon and say that their extremely thin margins are hurting competitors, but they're helping ultimately consumers. So you have to first decide who is being harmed in this, and then are they the right constituency that we want to support here? Would breaking up an Amazon, for example, help competitors, but would it then in turn harm other competitors? Would it harm ultimately consumers because prices might be higher? I think those are the bigger questions we have to first determine before we determine what the right approach should be.
Now, let's look at one of the boldest recommendations of this report, and it is the breaking up of some of these companies. Now, the Democrat House Committee says that some of these companies may need to be spun off or broken up or have business structures that fully separate the different lines of businesses away from the parent company. Why is this an important measure, or why could it be considered an important measure for these businesses?
Well, historically, when you look at antitrust regulation, it was around breaking up large companies that were ultimately restricting supply into a marketplace. So, the traditional monopoly argument is that you have a company that has control over a marketplace. They restrict supply into that marketplace in order to drive up prices, and then they can extract higher rents from market participants, ultimately from customers that are in that marketplace. I would argue the internet, though, is quite different. We aren't dealing in a world of scarcity, but a world of abundance, where it's an abundance of information. Many of these goods are offered for free by the providers, and they're obviously monetizing other aspects and other services. But I think we need to look at modernizing some of the antitrust regulation that we're trying to impose, as opposed to using some of these blunt instruments that might work in physical goods markets or markets that are dealing in scarce resources. That isn't the internet. We're dealing in an abundant marketplace, and we need to address it in an appropriate way.
So do you think we'll see change anytime soon?
It's unlikely that we'll see change anytime soon. Certainly, Congress has indicated, at least the House has indicated here, that they feel like efforts should be made and potentially will be made in the year ahead. Should Biden, for example, win the presidency, this probably begins to outline what his antitrust initiatives will be in the year ahead. So we'll be watching those closely as we watch the election here in November closely, to determine what tech policy might look like moving forward. But I think before we jump in and start breaking up companies, we really need to look at who's being harmed, by these companies, and recognize that we should look to alleviate economic harm to consumers and maybe to businesses if we determine that they're the right constituency. We need to make sure we're doing what's in the best interest of these market players and not just trying to protect legacy business models that are having a difficult time competing in an increasingly digital environment.
Sean Dubrovac from the Avrio Institute in Washington, thank you again for joining us on the program.